Okay, first of all, I want to make sure I talk about the sum and difference formulas the way I have them written in your formula sheet. I have the cosine of alpha plus or minus beta, so it equals this equation. So what I want you to see is when it says plus or minus, if you're going to use the plus, alpha plus beta, then you're going to use this top sign right here, the minus. So if you have the cosine of alpha plus beta, it's going to be the cosine of alpha times the cosine of beta minus sine of alpha sine of beta. If you're going to use the minus sign down here, you use the bottom sign, so it's cosine of alpha minus beta will be the cosine of alpha cosine of beta plus sine alpha times sine of beta. So just want you to realize in these, just kind of save retyping them. If you're using the top sign in here, you'll use the top sign over here. Bottom sign, bottom sign. Okay, so I want to explain those formulas first. Those should also be in your notes from today. All right, so to use those formulas, we're going to look at number 1, where it says the sine of 5 pi over 12. So I had said the best thing to do with those is to just start writing down the things you know, because they're all, if you look, all 3 of those have 12s. So I would write down off to the side, I know pi over 6, I know pi over 4, and then there's pi over 3. And if we need to, we can say pi over 2, which is 90 degrees. And then in the second quadrant, we'd have a reference angle of pi over 3. We'd have a reference angle of pi over 4. We'd have a reference angle of pi over 6. And then we'd have pi. So those are kind of all of the ones, at least in the first and second quadrant, we know. Usually we don't have to go too much further than that. So we want to do 12ths. So I'm just going to multiply this by 2 over 2. So I would get 2 pi over 12. Pi over 4 would end up being, if I multiply by 3 over 3, 3 pi over 12. Pi over 3 I'd multiply by 4 over 4, so that's 4 pi over 12. This I'd have to multiply by 6 over 6, so I'd get 6 pi over 12. And I could keep going. You know, this would be, if I multiply by 4 over 4 to get 12ths, I'd get 8 pi over 12. This one I'd have to multiply by 3 over 3, so I'd get 9 pi over 12. And this one I'd have to multiply by 2 over 2, so I'd get 10 pi over 12. So sometimes it might be good, just before you get started, to just start writing as many of those down as you feel like you need to. You know, this gets me through the first and second quadrant, which seems like it's okay since these numbers here that I'm looking for angles aren't too big. So, you know, do that ahead of time. So then when I see sine of 5 pi over 12, well, to get 5 pi over 12, I'm going to take 2 pi over 12 plus 3 pi over 12. An easy way to do it. There's probably other ways that I could get 5 pi over 12, but to me that looks like the easiest one. So I'm going to rewrite this as the sine of 2, and I'll write it this way first. I don't think you have to write this out, but I'm going to do this just so that you see that's what I did. 2 pi over 12 plus 3 pi over 12, and so that becomes pi over 6 plus pi over 4. So, sorry about that. The formula for sine of alpha plus beta is here. I'm using this one. So I'm going to take the sine of alpha cosine beta plus cosine alpha sine beta. So I'm using that formula because it's sine and it's alpha plus beta. So I'm going to take the sine of pi over 6, that's alpha, times the cosine of beta, so the cosine of pi over 4. Oh, no. Okay, good. Whew, I didn't want to leave. We're doing sine, so then it's plus in the formula. Cosine of the first angle and sine of the second angle. So that is my formula. It's just sine of alpha, cosine beta, plus cosine alpha, sine beta. So now we just have to fill these in. You have to remember what they are. And someone said they kind of thought they were running out of room. You either could do that below, or at this point I could just kind of do it above. Sine of pi over 6 is, that's the y value of pi over 6, so that would be 1/2. The cosine of pi over 4 is radical 2 over 2. The cosine of pi over 6 is the x value, which would be radical 3 over 2. And the sine of pi over 4 is radical 2 over 2. So my final answer, I'll put that over here, is radical 2 plus radical 6 all over 4. radical 2 plus radical 6 all over 4. Because again, you're just going to take and multiply these so you get radical 2 over 4. This you get radical 6 over 4, so I can just put those together. Okay, so that's the answer to the first one. All right, second one, tangent. Now tangent's a little tougher because we don't have a formula for tangent, but I do know that the tangent is the sine over the cosine. So I'm going to have to figure out, okay, can I add or subtract to get 19 pi over 12? And then I just have to use my formula for the sine over the cosine. So when I look at this one, and I'll kind of draw my line there. When I look at this one, I want to know two things that add up to 19 pi over 12. That's a 12 again. Good thing I have an eraser. 19 pi over 12. And I see that if I add these two up, I could get 19 pi over 12. So I'm going to rewrite this as 9 pi over 12 plus 10 pi over 12. So I'm going to again have the sine of that on the top, and the 9 pi over 12 is really 3 pi over 4, so I'm going to write that 3 pi over 4 plus 10 pi over 12 would be 5 pi over 6. So I'm going to take the sine of that alpha plus beta, divide it by the cosine of that alpha plus beta. And you're right, I didn't give you enough room for this one. So let's use our formulas. Sine of alpha plus beta is just like the one we did up there. So we're going to take the sine of the first, sine of 3 pi over 4, times the cosine of the second, cosine of 5 pi over 6, plus the cosine of the first, times the sine of the second. I always need to kind of double check that I've done this correctly. So I took the sine of the first, cosine of the second, plus cosine of the first, sine of the second. So I usually call them first and second instead of alpha and beta, but that's really alpha and beta. And then same thing down here, but the cosine of one angle plus another one of alpha plus beta is the cosine of the first. And then my formula says I take the cosine of the second minus the sine of the first and the sine of the second. Now, let me make sure you can see all of that. So this is just the formula for the sine of alpha plus beta, and this is the formula for the cosine of alpha plus beta. All right, now we just need to fill in what we know. Sine of 3 pi over 4. 3 pi over 4 is in the second quadrant. Reference angle is pi over 4. So that's going to be a sine of a positive sine, radical 2 over 2. And now I got to move over this way a little bit. Okay, and then the cosine of 5 pi over 6. That has a reference angle of pi over 6. It's in the second quadrant. So the cosine would be negative radical 3 over 2. Plus, now I need to take the cosine of 3 pi over 4. Cosine in the fourth, or in the second quadrant, cosine would be negative. So that's going to be negative radical 2 over 2. This really brings back that unit circle. And then sine of 5 pi over 6, that's the y value with a reference angle of pi over 6. In the second quadrant, that will be a positive 1/2. And then in the denominator, now this will be a little bit easier because I already found some of these things. The cosine of 3 pi over 4 we said was negative radical 2 over 2. The cosine of 5 pi over 6 we said was negative radical 3 over 2. Minus the sine of 3 pi over 4 was radical 2 over 2. And the sine of 5 pi over 6 we said was 1/2. All right, so that's what we get when we fill all of those things in. And it will be helpful if you write this step up here, because if you get the ordered pairs wrong, that's different than if you get the formula wrong. So I think it's best if you always write that out and then write in what you get when you evaluate those. So let's simplify. This is going to be negative radical 6 over 4. This is going to be a negative radical 2 over 4. So I'm going to write all of that over 4. This is going to be a positive radical 6 over 4 minus, this will be radical 2 over 4. And so when I look at those, how am I going to simplify those? Well, I have this complex fraction. I guess I should have written this as one fraction like I did the top. Let's write this as one fraction. Radical 6 minus radical 2 all over 4. Might as well write them the same. And then I see that, okay, I have this complex fraction. So to get rid of that, I'm just going to multiply by 4 over 4, which just means that's going to go away, and so is that. So my final answer is going to be negative radical 6 minus radical 2 all over radical 6 minus radical 2. And you cannot simplify those, even though they look really, really similar. These are both negative, and this is a positive and a negative, so they don't cancel. That's my answer. And then real quick, we'll do this one, negative pi over 12. Well, to get negative pi over 12, a lot of different ways I can do it. I'm going to take 2 pi over 12 minus 3 pi over 12. That will give me negative 1 pi over 12. So I'm going to write that as the secant of 2 pi over 12 minus 3 pi over 12. Now there's many other ways to get that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the cosine of that, which is pi over 6 minus pi over 4. And then I'm just going to flip it because the secant is just the reciprocal of the cosine. So to do that, cosine of alpha minus beta is the cosine of alpha, so cosine of pi over 6 times the cosine of beta, cosine of pi over 4. Because I have the minus sign, I have to use plus the sine of the first angle and the sine of the second. And so when I do that and simplify that, I'm going to get cosine of pi over 6 would be radical 3 over 2. Cosine of that would be radical 2 over 2. Plus sine would be 1/2 radical 2 over 2. So I get radical 6 plus radical 2 all over 4. That's the cosine, but the question was, what's the secant? Secant is just the reciprocal of that. So once I found the cosine, my final answer is just going to be the reciprocal of that. So all you have to do is flip it. That's how the easiest way to find your reciprocal, is just find the cosine and then flip it. Okay, so that's the first 3 problems.